Hello, everybody, and welcome to the September 27th meeting of the Westford Budget Task Force. We are waiting for just a few more people to join us, but maybe we can start off by taking a look at the minutes. I don't know if people had a chance to look at the minutes. We're ready to vote on those. We have July 17th and August 30. How about a thumbs up if you've looked at them and feel like you want to vote? Otherwise, we'll. Oh, Dan, you have your hand up. Sorry.
Yep. So we don't have the July 17th minutes done yet. So those are a placeholder on here. So we do just have the August 30th.
Got it.
Are the July ones just the subcommittee that I owe?
Yes. Yep.
Yes.
Okay. People feel good about voting to approve the August 30? I see some heads nodding. Okay. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, just go ahead and raise your hand. Excellent. Chris, are you abstaining?
Abstaining, yeah.
Okay. Good. Okay, so we're checking in. So we're deep in. Maybe I'll back up just a bit. So where are we in the big march of progress? So we have now set the date for presenting our report to the various boards on October 18th. That'll be at Millennium. It'll have a virtual way to participate if that's the best way for you to participate. We're going to try to get the document out to everybody. I think, Kristen, we said the day right after the Indigenous Peoples Day weekend. So that's, I don't know, the 10th or something like that. So that's what we're aiming towards. We could do a version there, still marked draft, I think, if there's just a couple of things we're finishing up and then get them a final. But we want to give everyone a good amount of time. There's so much content here that what we do as a group is just going to be a very high level summary. So I want people to have a chance to dig in. Valerie?
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to make sure as a committee, we sort of stop and think about whether Millennium is the best fit for that venue, that meeting. We just recently, I think we've done a good job of drumming up interest in this topic. And just last week, Christina and I were at a League of Women Voters civic social with some interest, and that was a room full of 25 people. And when I think about, how many is on FinCom? 7. We're like 9 people, select boards 5, school committee 7. Like, will there be enough room in Millennium for any audience to kind of fit around that many committee members? And just trying to think that through and make sure we don't wait until the last minute to consider logistics.
So I know for the select board, one member will not be able to join and another member will be joining remotely. So we're down to 3 for the select board. And obviously Tom is on both. So that's counting. I don't know if school committee and FinCom have reached out to how people will be participating, or if the full number on the board are able to participate.
What would the option be that would be one bigger that we can still engineer remote access?
What's your memory, Dr. Chu, of the feasibility study meeting that we held at Stony Brook? That was hybrid, wasn't it?
Yeah, we did a hybrid meeting from the Stony Brook Auditorium, and we could do that as well too. Setting up, we could bring the owl with us and set that up, and or even just use another camera. But we did that. We had about 25 people in attendance, and then we were broadcast live via Zoom throughout the day.
And WestfordCAT was there too, right?
WestfordCAT was there, yep. Mm-hmm. And so we could make sure that Stony Brook was available for us for this purpose, if that's what we want to do. I agree with Valerie that depending on the number of people who might want to come, Millennium could be tight for that. But we also have the overflow space and into the all-purpose room right next to it. So that's also still a possibility.
Well, I'd be thrilled if we had standing room only. So I guess the question is, I guess maybe from the committees, I guess our drop dead to decide would probably be we could still decide next week, I think, to change. So maybe in between now and next week, if school committee and if FinCom can think about how their members will join. If it's going to be a mix, then we can probably still fit. If it looks like everyone's going to be there, then we should probably go ahead and change.
Yeah, I could just be being optimistic about in-person audience members too. So I'm happy to stick with Millennium. I just wanted to make sure we discussed and thought about it.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Valerie. So
Logistically, it's definitely easier to stay at the Millennium. Logistically, as far as the hybrid option, but we can do it elsewhere.
okay. Amy.
Is the library able to do hybrid? The big function room in the downstairs?
I'm not sure. I haven't done a
Just curious.
sort of a hybrid meeting from that space. Dan?
I don't think WCAT is set up there, so that's part of the
Oh,
issue.
got it. That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, it's a little bit easier if we're in a space that WestfordCAT's used to being in because they have permanent cameras set up. So, okay, sounds like we're probably going to stay at Millennium, but we'll check in again next week and see if that's still makes sense. I'm trying to think if there are other big moving pieces to the budget that have come up. One is probably the waste collection agreement. Kristen, if you just want to mention that. Again, kudos to Budget Task Force members, Christina, for encouraging us to take a look at this and what might be a pretty significant win.
Yeah, absolutely. We gave a presentation last evening to the select board that after Christina had brought to my attention that she was digging a little bit deeper on what Chelmsford was doing with their solid waste and recycling. Chelmsford is with a hauler right now that is a local hauler doing manual collection with unlimited recycling. This hauler did not see our bid proposal, so did not bid on the process back in May. However, under Chapter 30B, solid waste and recycling is exempt from Chapter 30B, so we're able to go out and solicit bids to anyone we see fit in a timeline that we see fit. And we contacted that hauler. Now it was 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago, to ask for a bid. They are able to provide solid waste and recycling for the town of Westford for manual collection, so the 3-bin limit, for every week, for every other week, unlimited recycling, and then obviously haul our trash and recycling from our municipal and school buildings. And would not require us to buy totes, which was about a $900,000 to $1 million expense over the life of the contract. And we are estimating right now that this hauler would save us $1.7 to $1.8 million over the course of 5 years. Again, that major driver being the bins, and we would not be forced to limit our recycling. Now, we know that this option does not limit the amount of trash that people are putting in at the curb. The select board or other departments can still investigate a pay-as-you-throw option or a future bin option. But we're currently going through that analysis now. We did give Waste Management an update on this on Friday, and we offered that they could match this offer, which they were a bit shocked at the beginning, as I'm sure you can imagine, but they have come back with some innovative thoughts that they may be able to match. So internally, we are still going through the mechanics of everything and the pricing of everything. But another win for the Budget Task Force. I know, 2 weeks ago at the select board meeting, ambulance rates were increased based upon a recommendation that was made from this group. And now we're investigating how we can further save related to trash and recycling. So happy to answer any questions on the periphery that I can now, but please stay tuned for that in the near future as well.
What did we ever do without the Budget Task Force? Don't worry, we are going to release you from your charge as planned. We're not going to hold on to you. Christina.
I just wanted to say thank you very much for actually going out and doing that work, Kristen, and anyone else in the town. I sent that email like crossing my fingers saying, oh man, I hope I'm not like throwing a big monkey wrench in everything, but I just, I couldn't not bring that to your attention. So I'm just glad that you were able to, hopefully do something with it.
Yeah, it not in Westford, but in organizational behavior generally, it would have been easy to say, well, look, we're too far along, and and we didn't. So kudos to. I'm sure it didn't feel great and was like frustrating to have us rabbit pop out of a hat at the last second from the town's planning point of view, but definitely worth it. So the other thing that we maybe can just touch base on, and I don't have a great answer for this, is a couple times the question has come up how capital fits into this whole discussion. We just lost Kristen. Hopefully she'll come back soon. So capital is really handled in a separate process. It's easy to believe that we, because of budget constraints, have starved capital and aren't moving through the capital improvement inventory at the pace that we'd like. I think that there's a hunger just to have some visibility to that issue, be part of this. It's not really in our charge, and it's not really in the same emergency kind of category, in my point of view, as some of these, we have to pay them in our budget sort of challenges that we've been facing. So I'm trying to think of a way to engage with the capital committee and give a little bit of space to the argument that we're not going to be able to. We never can do everything. We've got $30 million of capital requests every year. We're not talking about budgeting $30 million. We're talking about, are there things that keep getting pushed back that we need to address, that we're failing to address because we just keep pushing them out. So I'm trying to find a way, and there may be some good ideas here on the committee from people who've been on that committee. I've actually never been on the capital committee. Is there a way to get a read on, here's a sort of an essential budget that if we don't find a way to move through this essential budget sort of inventory of stuff faster than we are, we're going to run the risk of really falling behind. So I guess I'm just floating this for ideas, get your reaction. It could be that the action item is just to follow up with the capital committee and say, look, we want to create space for this, and give you an opening to give sort of an indication of where we think this kind of critical shortfall is, or maybe there's an emergency program that hasn't been addressed. But I saw a hand there for a second, Valerie. I don't know if you wanted to weigh in on that, but I do want to make sure we consider that at least.
I had sort of a tangential point, so I didn't want to derail initial reaction. So I'll wait a minute.
Okay. Yeah, I don't. I know I'm sort of springing this on you. Maybe Kristen, you've got an opinion, but about the most productive way to give voice to what probably is also an urgent need that probably does belong to, is worthy of some awareness, but not something that we're going to go do the homework for. Now, Kristen, do you have a good sense of a way we might? You know the issue I'm talking about.
Yes, I do. And Dan, please feel free to jump in, because I'm only 8 months into this capital planning process. You have a lot more knowledge and history. We asked departments to submit a 5-year capital plan, and capital planning committee reviews that and provides a recommendation to the town manager. And then the town manager works with the finance director to understand where our finances are on a year-to-year basis, and how we can either fund those through our free cash allocation or through other sources, whether it be a debt exclusion in the limit or outside of the limit or something else. I think certainly we should have a holistic view towards the capital that we need with the town of Westford. But right now, I'm not quite sure how we integrate that with such an operating challenge, right? So if we're going to talk about an override, sometimes it's talked about as an operational override, sometimes it's talked about as a capital override, sometimes they go in together. Sometimes it's a different function. So I think, yes, we need to at least acknowledge it in our report that we understand that there are capital challenges. This budget task force was really charged with the operational side and how we get things done. If there are ways that we can cut costs on the operations to fund capital, that's looked at, but perhaps sometimes more capital means more operational costs as well. So this is not a good answer. It's kind of beating around the bush type of answer, but I think we nod to it, we talk about it, but it needs further study that I don't think that we're going to get to quite at this time, but we can definitely acknowledge it.
Yeah, Dan, I don't know if you have a take on that.
Yeah, the parts that really impact what we're doing here is the operational budget impact. So basically, whenever we bond within the levy limit, that has impacts and definitely into future years. So that's really something to be considered if we want capacity for further borrowing for those mid-sized projects. But I know with like the school feasibility study coming on, the town working on one, we're going to definitely see a lot of capital requests coming forward, and a lot of them which will probably require debt exclusions to fund once they get up into that $4 or $5, $6 million area. That's just too much to absorb within the budget. So I know years ago when I first started, we used to have the capital within the levy limit, and it was always the first thing to be cut year after year to make room for operations. So paying for the capital out of free cash has been a great way to catch up on that list. We've been doing very well over the past several years funding the backlog, but there's always more that could be done. It's just prioritizing the projects and getting done what's needed at this time.
So I think maybe what I'll do, I'm sorry, Valerie?
I'm going to wait to see what Christina says. Sorry.
Okay, fair enough. Christina?
So I have been on the capital planning committee for 3 years, I think. And this just may be my impression or my interpretation. So it's solely just my own thoughts here. I know we do have the departments come up with a 5-year capital plan. But I still always sort of feel like we're a little bit in a firefighting mode where we're trying to take care of like the things that are most crucial, and we never quite get to kind of planning ahead. And that's not to say like 100%, but it just sort of feels like there's things that sort of come up and we have to get these fixed because, a leak is roof is leaking, or, something like that, or something is kind of come to a head of some point. And again, that could just be, maybe I'm not seeing what's going on behind the scenes, but that's just sort of how it seems to work a little bit for me. So I think it would be better if we had a little bit more of a comprehensive plan. The school feasibility study, I have not kept up with, so I don't know what's coming, but I think that's going to be a really great tool to figure out what needs to be done with all of our buildings. I'm sure there's other things, maybe Steve Cronin knows which huge pieces of equipment are going to need to, be replaced, and are going to be big dollar figures, things like that I don't feel like I have a handle on a bigger picture in that sense.
All right, Valerie, you want to go now, or?
I was just going to say in one of my, and I can't like quote it right now or find a link, but I remember reading in one of my researches for how other towns sort of deal with shortfalls and find efficiencies was in sort of bundling those mid cost projects for borrowing. I'm using the wrong words, but Dan is nodding. Is that something we've done in the past but don't recently do, or you and Christine sort of decide case by case? Is there really savings there? It's not clear to me.
So you're just paying for the capital over time rather than upfront. So if we have urgent pieces, it's a great way to get the needs addressed immediately. But again, you're just paying, it's taking operating funds away from future years. So that's really the trade-off where, but it's healthy to have debt. The policy says we want 7 to 10% of the operating budget in there. So that is a great way to fund a lot of projects, but it's, just weighing the trade-offs between the operating versus the capital too. But some communities do take a bunch of projects, bundle them together, put them in an exclusion or something like that, but that is common.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Chris?
I guess my question was when you had actually mentioned, giving a nod to the capital planning committee. My question is do we want to include in the report just an acknowledgement that capital is this whole separate thing, and it does have this committee? People might not be aware of that, but the capital planning committee is actually very well representative, right? I mean, there's members from different elected officials, there's community members, there's department heads, and that might just be worth in our report letting people know that that's a whole other thing, and because people just might not be aware of that.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. So let me take a stab at what we might do here then. So it sounds like we do want to just explain what capital is, just so the people, good citizens of Westford reading this will we'll understand how that gets bucketed, because you're right, it's not clear. And I think maybe what I'll do is ask Kristen if maybe we can meet with the chair of the capital planning committee and basically say, would they have the bandwidth to do sort of a more formal 5-year plan? I know that that's part of the plan each year, but with the idea that if they do need to set an expectation for how to stay current over the next 5 years, that's likely to fall outside of normal budget, meaning it would need to be a debt exclusion. We'd sort of like to have a sense of that. Like, in year 2, there's likely going to need to be a debt exclusion to cover these 4 things if we want to stay current. And that's not a commitment that we're making to do it, but at least then we'll have that roadmap view. And also, I want the whole capital committee to weigh in too, because there's a lot of things on the forecast, potential forecast that are expensive and may not have broad public support at this point. So, Valerie?
Yeah, when you worded it like that, I think there's going to be a lot of appetite for hearing that as a holistic plan. Like one thing, one of the questions from the audience at last week's League of Women Voters Civic Social about the budget task force was, what is the 10-year outlook, right? Like, and so I think anything we can do to capture things that we know are going to be coming, even if they aren't sort of in this lane, I think would be very helpful for someone, so that they're not like, wait a minute, I read that report last year and now you're telling me there's this new sort of project to pay for. So yeah, I think you're right that to find a way to sort of capture it, even if it's stay tuned for this other report or something.
Yeah, I think that we don't know what the boards will decide, but it won't be easy to do everything at once. And so it could be that if there is something that's, a debt exclusion project, that it would actually show up not in March, but at some later meeting. So we may have a little bit more time on that.
Or even just a way to sort of nod to the things that we know have been approved for like designs, right? Or, sometimes there's like that preliminary step that gets funded, but the bigger project is not yet being asked yet. Does that make sense? So.
Yeah, it came up last night that, the Westford Academy roof and air handling stuff is sort of on death's door and is going to need to be addressed. It came up in the context of energy efficiency and PV installations. And so there are these weaving timelines that, might be good to look at for more than a year in advance. Okay, so I'll talk with the capital planning committee and ask them if they're able to take on basically this additional layer, which is, if we did say we need to really address the whole inventory of problems that we see in front of us in the next 5 years, when would that surface the need for something outside the normal budget process, just for our awareness?
Tom, just to
go ahead, Kristen.
Interject on that. So at the last capital planning committee, we did give a brief overview of the work of the budget task force and potentially how they can help with our work. So I don't think this will come as a surprise. But we know that they have about a $30 million backlog that they'd like to get done as soon as possible, which we all know that's not going to be happening. So Dan, do you have any thoughts on how to approach this with them, or how to weave it in, or how to do something different that we're not doing already?
I'd like to think about it a little bit, but
no, I can stump you. That's okay.
Yeah, we usually talk about the year-one projects and focus on those, and ask if any projects in the outlying 4 years are urgent enough to move up. So, but just due to time constraints, we usually don't get into too much detail on those outlying years. So,
yeah, it makes sense, and as a budgeting practice, it makes a lot of sense to do it the way we've historically done it. So we are maybe asking for something a little bit different. So why don't we take a week to think about it, and maybe Kristen, Dan, and I can put our heads together and figure out if we know how to ask for the right thing in a specific way. And just we'll make it clear both in the report and our presentation to the boards that the capital is a really important part of this discussion. It's something that fell outside our mandate, but is something that deserves attention. Chris?
On that note, I think one of the things I had shared with the capital planning committee at our last meeting too was, we're developing our 10-year plan for the schools based on the information from the feasibility study. So it also, it's like, it's just pointing us in other directions, right? But like the idea of acknowledging that the schools have done a feasibility study and there is information forthcoming, that the town is about to engage in a feasibility study, and there will be more information for, like, to let people know that even at the time that we publish this report, we won't have the 10-year plan to point to, but we can tell people that that's actually in work. And that's one of our major projects this year, is to take the recommendations from the feasibility report and to prioritize them with the school committee to actually look and see, okay, what does our 10-year outlook, what is that? So that then the capital planning has that updated, school committee, select board, all of that information.
Okay, good, and good to include in the text block that we'll add. One other stray item. So Kristen mentioned that it's increasingly likely that we're going to move to E.L. Harvey as the new waste collector. That does leave, how do we pursue the advantages that we have? Westford citizens produce less waste, and so our tipping fees were lower, and it's better for the environment and a lot of other good things. So I think we will strongly recommend that if the town does take that paired with it is some sort of educational campaign that's designed towards promoting behaviors that will reduce waste. So I don't want to take this new contract and if it's $1.7 million cheaper, we have to take it. I don't want to just take that and be in the same place in 5 years. Westford's, throwing away 20% more trash than our neighbors. So that will be a priority for us to, I hope that'll be a recommendation we make if that's the path that the town takes, is that we really prioritize and put some resource behind this waste reduction plan. Jenna?
Just to hop on that, I did also see about the Chelmsford composting program that they just put into place. I think I added some information in our composting section on that too, with a potential recommendation that we pursue as a town, trying to put together some sort of reduced composting. So I think that goes hand in hand with what you're saying on the trash, and continuing to push that narrative, not just for the environment's sake, but also it'll still reduce costs if we can still get our trash down, right? Because we're still paying per what we throw. So I think just continuing that narrative in both places is good.
Okay, good. Yeah, good point. Christina?
I definitely agree with recommending that we do something to decrease Westford's trash. I know you'd mentioned education, Tom. I think we don't need to discuss it here, but the Recycling Commission has been trying to do that for years and just not really pushing the needle. So with solely education, so I think there may need to be something else that goes along with that. I don't exactly know what the something else is. The only tool in my toolbox that I can think of is some sort of pay as you throw, to sort of force people into making that change. And I hate to say that, but I don't know another way. And then going off of Shayna's comment with the composting, I've actually been speaking to both Black Earth and Bootstrap Composting, their pickup services in the area, to see what kind of program Westford could implement. And it sounds like it wouldn't really be any commitment from the town. It would just be kind of a side, arrangement, but we could get a better rate for the residents to get compost picked up from their house. Once I hear back from the other two with some follow-up questions, I was going to come to Kristen, possibly the Recycling Commission, and just sort of see who wants to do what with that information.
Okay, good. Thanks, Christina. And we'll obviously team up with the Recycling Commission so we don't reinvent the wheel and make sure we're doing something new. Maybe we could just hold the thread out there. If we don't hit some target for reduction, that'll trigger some sort of pay as you throw, option. We have to think about what that looks like, but okay. So let's, if we're good with that for now, let's just change gears and focus on documents. So let's see, how much time do we have? We have about 2 weeks, a little more than 2 weeks, 2 weeks from Tuesday. So we do have time to get the rest of the content in, say, over the next week maybe, and then we'll have to move directly to editing. I looked at the document over the weekend, and there's a lot of good stuff in there, and thank you everyone for adding, which we've been able to add. So maybe we can do now is talk through the note that Valerie sent out. People can just quickly chime in on whether it's still outstanding or whether it's something that they've been able to move on, or if there are any questions, you can. And then maybe in a couple days, Valerie and Amy and I can again go through the document again and just comb through it and just say, okay, looks like it's either clearly assigned or this is missing. And then next week we're going to have to move into kind of editing mode. So I don't know, Valerie, you'd volunteered for that, and I think maybe Shanna was also willing to help, but I guess we'll have to figure out how we want to do that. Valerie, maybe just before we jump in, do you have a read on the roadmap from here, and how much help you'd like, and what the best way to receive that help would be in terms of the reading, editing part?
I think, in my mind, the email I sent about with the owners and stuff was, there was a lot of like the current budget chunk that Dan, I think, ran with, and he and I chatted offline about a population graph that's outstanding. There's a big chunk of the benchmarking from me that I owe, and then Shana and I were working on the school fees analysis. And then, so for me, those feel doable in the next week. There's no sort of help needed specific there. And then in my mind, there's just sort of the other chunk is like the efficiencies / consequences. And I don't have a good handle at the moment, just in the last day or two with our meeting last night, haven't checked. Kristen, I know you shared that you did some updates over the weekend. I don't have a good feel for those to speak to how those are shaping up and if the committee needs to be discussing anything there.
Yeah, so I did spend a lot of time over the weekend and on Monday with the efficiencies section. I still need to dig into the consequences section, which I hope to have done by Saturday midday. And I know there was some notes I think I had to Valerie and Dr. Chu on some of the efficiencies in the document. So that's where I stand on that section.
Okay, let's go through the list, and I have it printed right here, so I can go through it. Or if Valerie, if you'd like to walk through it, happy to have me do it. Okay. So let's see, executive summary. I guess Valerie, I'll offer if that is something you want to assign back to me, I'd be happy to, or you, I think, probably do a better job than I would anyway, so we can leave that as it is. So just let me know. Let's see. Actually, chaos has just erupted here, as you might hear. Someone's at the door, so I'm just going to put you on mute and go see what that is. Valerie, could you sort of take through, and I'll just be right back.
Yeah, so if anyone has that email up, the next bullet point was in the introduction is a guiding tenets section that I think I remember early on Erica had volunteered to sort of read. Hingham had something like that in their report, and she had volunteered to sort of make fit Westford a little bit better and then bring over into our report. And I just wanted to make sure that either we allot some time as a committee to discuss that, or just make sure that everyone has a minute to read it, because some of it talks about, ensuring services remain sort of untouched, and I just don't know if that's still relevant. Like, it seems like maybe that's like a nice to have. I don't know. So it just seems like we might need to discuss that as Sorry. So if anybody has any initial reactions to that section, I guess we could either discuss that now or put it on an upcoming agenda item, or I don't have it.
I have it open, Valerie. You want me to share it?
Yeah,
So
sure. I guess
Might as well do it now.
Sure. Yeah. So ensure the continuous delivery of town services at a level that is consistent with the reasonable needs and expectations of its citizens. Ensure that people are varied economic means remain a part of our community. Provide for the acquisition and maintenance of appropriate infrastructure. So like, these are, I guess, maybe it's just needs like a lead in. What do people think about this? Because it's setting the bar kind of high, and then we have all this sort of bad news after it. Not to be flippant, but I just want to make sure we're addressing this. Christina?
So I guess the issue that I have with this is it sounded like Hingham discussed this up front. And this is what they went into their whole effort with these in mind. And we didn't do that. So I'm not sure that this really fits. I think we just, we sort of did our research and we came up with the numbers and let that sort of guide us. So I don't know, that's sort of my feeling.
Right, like our guiding tenets are the charge that the select board gave to the budget task force, more so than these items.
Yeah, they feel like idealistic, like, oh, of course we would love to do all these things and maintain and do these things, but that's not also, the rest of the report doesn't feel like it's backing that up. Tom, Sheena?
I feel like our guiding, I agree with Christina. I think that our guiding tenets were more so to let the research and the data do the talking, right? Is that we kind of went into it trying to have kind of a clean slate, but don't really know what the outcome was going to be. I mean, I think trying to keep services and trying to keep taxes down are a real hierarchical, concept. But I do think, to both Christina and Kristen's points, I think it was following the charter, but really actually listening to what we discovered and found and making the data, kind of no preconceived notion, as opposed to this was our preconceived notion that we wanted to meet all these expectations.
Yeah, I was going to say this is more like the guidance that we give to Kristen to actually form the budget. So we don't, the remit of this committee is not to develop a budget. I mean, if you're developing a budget, you need to have all these things in mind. Like you have to, provide for infrastructure and all this other stuff, but we weren't really doing that. So I guess I would support the idea of rewriting this along the lines of what Shannon said, which is sort of, our approach was to have no preconceived notions, have this be heavily data driven, to use as much wisdom from peer communities as we possibly could. So yeah, I think a rewrite here to what we actually did is totally appropriate. And if you want to assign that to me, I'd be happy to, or if someone else wants to jump on that, that's, please.
I don't see anyone else
Do
volunteering,
you,
but
Tom, if you want to start like a outline or a draft, I'm happy to
great.
take a rough thing and work with you on it.
Do you want to, is your chaos still happening, Tom, or do you want to keep going through it?
Actually, I think if do you mind keep going? I think
Sure.
it's
So the
you did a great
next
job.
section was let's see, market selection approach. I just had a note to myself to explain sort of how we came up with those two lists. It seemed like maybe it's talked about in the benchmarking again, but it talks just a quick blurb here. I'm hiding my screen, so ding if there's, or just jump in if there's a hand raised. We need somebody to briefly speak about how the community was engaged. We did that. I mean, I feel like it was maybe that it was one of our guiding tenets. I don't know, like it, we did really try to do that along the way, I think, with the Google forum and the summer forum and the retreat. And so it would be good to have that right up front about us in a section. So that is still looking for an owner. The next section is, Amy, you can take a stab at that? Okay, that'd be great. Thank you. The next section is background. So Dan, do you want to just speak to any edits you've done so I don't have to try and look while scrolling, or?
Sure. Do you mind if I share my screen again?
Please, yes.
All right.
I'm trying to look at like 3 different.
All right. So Valerie provided a list here. We're still looking on some information. It's basically the percentage of school age and 65+ groups. I haven't gotten to that yet. Those are two outstanding items. Home value over time, we have right here, dating, I should say 2001, I'll fix that. And we had some other charts down here that I thought looked a little more appropriate with the tax impact. Down here, the average tax bill, when we're actually talking about property taxes, we can change it. I just threw it in here for now. But yeah, we have the community comparison report, and we have to create a few bar charts. And I was hoping I'd talk to you before I start digging into it, just so we're on the same
Yep.
page.
Yep,
That'd be
sorry.
great.
Yep, that'd be great.
Okay.
Yeah, I just, and for anyone who's sort of chiming in, filling in here, I thought one of the values of Hingham's report is that they do such a good job showing like a snapshot and a brief history of Hingham's data, their own data, right? And so, you know, I think that's a very valuable section here. So, did you get to, okay, so that was the background. How have you done on any of the, did you get to the Prop 2.5 section?
I did. I've been writing a lot this week. So I left that
Q&A,
highlighted.
did that, because I just had that in mind of like a sort of a Q&A style. Did that make sense? Did that feel like it was
I
a
thought
good
it
fit?
worked.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
So I wrote some answers here, which of course, this is a first draft. I actually had Mark laying down at the treasurer collector's office, take a look at it, which I haven't incorporated his ads yet. So I'm going to do that this week. But yeah, I thought they were good. I tried to keep the responses brief.
Yeah.
Rather than drone on, but.
Great.
So I answered your questions there.
And if any, you know, I don't know, I think actually early on, we had even talked about like sort of a FAQ resource coming out of this about like things that, and so maybe there's a way after Amy, if you think about as you're going through the community input, the documents that Erica summarized and Vibhu did the analysis on, and open to any other members, if along the way, the retreat, whatever, if you think there are things that you've kept hearing over and over again that we should incorporate in some way and make sure they're answered, called out and answered in the report, let's incorporate them. Then there was a section for, I noticed revolving funds wasn't really mentioned, and reserves. How's that coming?
Yeah, I wrote that up.
And I know you like have this information elsewhere, right? So it was just about porting it over, or?
I rewrote it a bit just to
Oh, okay,
put
good.
some graphs in. So I add the section on enterprise funds. I thought that was important so people can understand those. So just a brief paragraph on each, and basically revenue coming in and any subsidies we've had within the general fund. Screen's not refreshing. There we go. And then we have the revolving funds. I actually took the bylaw that we have that was passed at town meeting. So it shows exactly what the revolving fund is, the spending authority, the revenue source that goes into the funds, and what the allowed expenses are. And basically just explain what the revolving funds are down here briefly. And then reserves, I talked about free cash, looking at our starting balances each year versus our ending balance, dating back to 2001. About the policy we have, how it's important for our bond rating, and then the town stabilization, which is our other portion of reserves that we add to free cash to have our reserve balance. And again, I made that chart here that showed the total reserves going back years. We've had a pretty good reserve balance the past couple of years since COVID ended.
Great. I think that those are all really helpful pieces to the Westford budget sort of background information. Anybody have any thoughts so far, or just keep going? Okay. Okay, so now I'm on expenses.
Yeah, there were a few questions on here that I think we had from the beginning, so I took a shot at trying to answer these. Basically how the budget is created. I popped in sort of our process here. How you send out the budgets in July, they're reviewed, department heads send it back, we meet with all of them. And then, in December, Kristen will present the budget. Then we have the FinCom hearings, and then we finally vote on the budget town meeting. The schools
Yeah.
are just a little bit different, where we have to vote on a bottom line number. It's up to the school administration to say how those dollars are spent. So that's the high level summary there. The different allocations to support different town services. I took a shot at this too and described the different town sections and school sections, the debt service, the overhead, and all that. There is a chart in here. It's not just all narrative. So I took that. I had to shorten it because it wouldn't fit. So I just went back to FY15 to kind of show, the budget increase for the town and school departments going back years. And then there's a couple questions here I haven't gotten to yet. Was kind of thinking on how to actually answer these.
Yeah, I feel like they were, I hear you. I feel like those
Yeah.
weren't as straightforward, right? They were sort of like brainstorming questions that
Yeah,
were sort of incorporated in the original outline. And so it didn't mean that like each one needed to be addressed. So I'll go back and look at that and see how
Okay.
it's all weaving together. I'll test print that page because I love a good small font size as much as the next person, but that chart might be actually unreadable. So
I was trying to fit it sideways too. So
Yeah,
landscape, but I could play with that a little too. But
okay. So we can figure that out. But I it's like, do you just go 1 year to just show what's happening right now, or people will ask about the trends. So yeah, it's tough. And I'm already scrolling down. I see that you did a quick update on the approved or upcoming jet exclusion ideas. And
yeah,
I think I had in an email to Tom had said like, how many should we do, right? And this is kind of ties into that capital conversation, which is, do we talk about things that we know are coming, or are just things that have been approved, or things that we know, like the design money or the feasibility money has been approved, so that they aren't a surprise a year from now for someone who is following this conversation this winter. So, this is a great start. I almost don't know whether to pull some of them back if they're not approved yet, and just stick with my original point was to have JV Fletcher expansion and Blanchard roof, because those are debt exclusions that we will see coming up, but and have been approved.
Mhm.
And then where do you draw the line if it's ones that haven't been fully approved yet for construction funds?
so
Then we
at the presentation during last March, we did have on all of our projections that this does not include the school feasibility study. So I think we want to at least keep that in mind. So like this graph here doesn't include any expenses for it because we don't have those figures yet. So for the time.
Right. Christina?
As far as what we should include and what not, I think, there's a line there, but I think school feasibility study, definitely, because that's going to generate a lot of stuff coming up. And I think people are going to flip if they don't have a heads up. There may be a couple of other things too. Like, I know I keep hearing there's at least, maybe that's part of the school feasibility, but there are a couple of roofs I know that people, we keep talking about. I'm sure there's HVAC systems. Maybe that gets caught all under school feasibility, but definitely the big hitters, I think we know they're coming.
Yeah. Is Cameron HVAC in here?
Well,
No, because last night we got the numbers in and it's almost $5 million for the entire project.
Okay.
So the select board took that off the warrant. We're looking at going back to the drawing board on a different solution.
Okay.
So I think it's something we can at least address, but we don't have any good numbers or conversation about it really.
Okay. And at some point, maybe it's, almost just like a list of, I don't know. I'll think about that a little bit more. You want to scroll down, Dan, the next,
Hold on,
Gina.
before we scroll down,
Yep.
at the top of that section, do we talk like explicitly about what this means from like a tax perspective? Do we have that summarized somewhere at the top? we were scrolling through it kind of quick and haven't read it offline yet.
Good question.
Because I really think that when we're talking about this section, we want to make sure it's pretty clear, right? That anything that we add to reserves, if I understand this correctly, which is possible I don't, but that those end up being potential tax increases down the road.
Yeah, maybe like page 21, Dan, underneath that, oh, great. Wait,
That
where's
was
that
something
one?
written on page 7 under revenue, but it could just as easily go under expenses as well. It just kind of explains what debt exclusion is. So,
Oh, I see.
so they're both related. The money comes in through your taxes and then it's expended on the projects.
Yeah, I
Right.
think maybe reiterating it in better like layman's terms before we go into a list,
Sure.
to
I
just
think,
make that piece clear, because at the end of the day, the boards may go and ask for a Proposition 2.5 override for our current gap, and then to be thinking about the fact that we have these upcoming projects that could require additional tax burden. Somebody, when they're making those decisions for themselves later, might want to be able to look at, do I want to do something now? What's coming in the pipeline? So I think just being explicitly clear that when we're quoting in sections, whether it's in a separate section about the capital improvement that hasn't happened yet, or it's reiterating what we're talking about with the school feasibility and blanched roofs and stuff, so that makes it really clear that that money does come from some sort of tax increase.
okay, that's helpful. I'll look at that sort of when I zoom out and look at it as a whole, the whole section. I think that'll become clearer. So did you have a chance, Dan, to import your budget challenges? Great.
I did.
Okay. Awesome.
So of course the trash and recycling is going to change from what I had originally wrote. So
Sure.
need to update that.
Okay.
So all these graphs need to be updated.
Okay.
So they're highlighted.
Okay.
Yeah, Shana, I did take your edits and incorporated those too and tried to mix them in. So thank you for those. Yeah, we have the energy costs.
Okay.
Yeah, non-union, union salaries, school contracts.
Great.
Yeah, it's all in here. We've seen this before, so
Yes, right. Perfect. That
I'll
all
skip
made sense
down.
there. So for potential revenue, I have an idea for how to sort of do this lead in. I just haven't had time to yet. And Shane, I may reach out to you on that. And then there was just, as I was going through this section, so you can scroll down, as I was going through this section, there was just some highlight. Yeah, the yellow highlights. I don't know if those are, if you could clarify, Shana, where you need, or if those are help needed, or if those are self highlights for yourself to go back to, or.
I think so. The middle boxes, I think I wasn't 100% sure what we need to do to adopt those things, whether we do them or not, right? It's just listing what it would take to adopt them. So I don't know, maybe that's something actually Kristen might be able to just fill in. Like if we did cell tower rentals, is that it goes before the select board for for approvals for the lease, whatever those were. And then just trying to figure out. So those are places where I just wasn't sure what the answers were.
Okay.
In terms of what we wanted to put as a dollar amount, and then also what we wanted to do as a recommendation at the end. Because I think some of the things that we have in this revenue section, most of it is completed. But I wasn't sure if we were going to talk as a group about our overall recommendations, or whether we were going to, or whether Tom and I were going to just take it offline and then other people could read it. So I wasn't exactly sure when we put in that last column a yes or a no. The ones that were obvious I filled in, but the ones that I thought we might need to talk about as a group.
Yeah, so
I guess I was.
Go ahead, Tom.
I was thinking, Shannon, that probably you and I would put together an executive summary, which would say, we looked at all these things and many of them have some good ideas, and we recommend, further consideration or pursuit of these 6. So maybe you and I can take a first crack at that.
Yeah.
I also think that it could be really powerful to reorder this table with the yeses at the top. right? So that you just instantly sort of open this section and you're like, recommendation to pursue, yes, 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 right? And then all the no's at the bottom or the NAs can help sort of drive that point very clearly from a quick glance.
I can do that, reorder it all once Tom and I finish deciding.
Okay, great. Tom, your name was next to a couple here. Update fee increases, cell tower rental income, and override section.
Yep. So both I have new text in there for those, and I reference Jeff put together a nice summary of town sort of fee comparisons versus other towns, which we may want to put in as an appendix. It's kind of like so much detail. So in what I wrote, I refer to it being there as an appendix. So maybe
Okay.
I'll just paste that in there as an appendix so that we can have that and we can decide if we want it there or not.
Yeah, it's possible too that, well, depending on how many there are, the schools might end up being similar. There's a lot of good information, but yeah, you're right. How much goes in an appendix and versus the body?
Yeah, the punchline is that our fees are basically competitive with surrounding towns, and those are the places that we're typically competing with for projects. So, and in some cases, we're already higher. So I don't see a big opportunity there. Also, the cumulative amount we receive from fees is just not that big. So I think it's $50,000 a year or something like that. And then we get paid $62,000 a year. I think it's either 62 or 82 for the cell tower at the water tank, but that goes into the revolving fund, the water department revolving fund. So it's not a revenue source. It could be a revenue source if it was on a town piece of property. So I think the punchline there is we should keep our eyes open. And if there's basically the way that they come up is that either Verizon or AT&T will say we need a new cell tower in this area, and they'll sort of put out a quote or a request for quote. And anybody who's in the area that might have an appropriate spot can bid. So there's not a lot of opportunity because you're depending on them needing a new cell tower at a certain location. But we should be open to that and be willing to consider it when it comes up.
And did you get to take a stab at an override section yet?
I did. I put in some text there as well,
Oh, okay.
largely
Sorry.
referring to what Dan had put forward because he covers it pretty well up front.
Okay.
So it's sort of brief. It basically says this is a policy decision. Here's how it would work. Here's what the approving authority is. Please, refer to section above for Westford's history of overrides.
Dan, I realize you're doing like exactly what I'm doing, and I'm reminding myself that I went through and created, like, labeled some of those headings as actual headings in Word. So if you turn on navigation under the view menu, it will let you jump around by each one of those sections. So go to view and then yeah, there. So now you should be able to like click on any of the text that was saved as a heading. Great. Does that help?
Sure does. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so benchmarking, Christina, any help needed in your section? I know mine's a big hole still.
Yeah, I think most of my data is here. I'm still sort of trying to figure out if it's the best layout, how it kind of looks. But I was also I'm still trying to get a hold of Vibhu because he was going to make better charts. The charts that came out of Tableau, I just did as kind of essentially almost just like a screenshot, and he said that he could make them look, yeah, like this one with the the library example there. He would make them look better. So I'm still kind of waiting for that. I put in, actually, while we're on the library, I did put in like the library hours of operation that Amy had come up with.
Mhm.
And any of my library data is really from that initial look. And I know Amy, had spoken to Ellen Rainville. So there may be other stuff, there may be different things that we need to put in there from that discussion.
Yeah, I have that. I'm gonna need to talk to somebody about editing because I haven't figured out how to do that.
Okay.
I wasn't able to do anything, so that's just a user error, I think, but I have it on my end, so.
Okay.
Is it like a document you need ported in, or you're just, you don't
No,
have-
I just, when I go into the budget task force, I'm not able to edit anything. So I have
Oh, okay.
read-only access. Maybe I only have read-only access, or maybe I am not doing something right. So
Okay.
I need to follow up with somebody on that.
Yeah, let me check that out for you, Amy.
Thank you.
The only other question that I kind of had for the group is, I kept the average and the median per capita costs for all of these things, and I just wasn't. I don't remember my statistics at all, so I just don't remember, like, should I be using one versus the other? What's more helpful?
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody.
I have the same sort of dilemma on the school side. It looks like Tom unmuted, and I will definitely let Dan or someone answer before me.
So median does a little bit better of excluding outliers. So if you've got a data set that's got Wellesley, or something that's crazy off the charts, median does a little bit better job of centering you, but you can certainly put both. And in this case, if they're close, that means that there aren't a lot of outliers, basically, that there's a pretty good distribution. So
Yeah, that was kind of what I was thinking. And there's some cases, like, honestly, I feel like for the trash and recycling and maybe like recreation, there are a lot of towns that have a zero cost in their budget for those areas. And it's not that it's an outlier. They've done something very specific to get that zero. And so there's a part of me thinking that they should be averaged in, that they shouldn't be sort of tossed out. But I just kind of wanted to run that by everybody, and I could just leave it. I could leave it as both.
yeah, I think both is fine. I mean, if someone's a real statistics nerd, they'll be able to determine what that means. But
Yeah.
I think it communicates the point really well.
Okay.
Either
And
way.
there's definitely some where charts just kind of didn't make sense. There were just too many holes, and so I sort of made a note or made a comment about that. I think that maybe. Oh, the only other thing that I was trying to, I'm not sure who's driving, but if somebody could if you just scroll down a little bit to like within this same library section, but just scroll down to like the next page, I think. Okay, let's stop. So I added in, actually scroll back up just a little bit. So the per capita, I say that the per capita spending is 7% higher than the average, 9% higher than the median. But to give a little bit more context around that, I put in the dollar figure. So like that last bullet says that if the library spending was in line with the average, it would be $124,000 savings, just to kind of give people like a reference as to what those percentages mean, because in some of them it could be a 2% and it could be $300,000, and in others it's a 20% and it's still like 50,000 or something. It's just, they're kind of all over the place. So I don't know how people thought about adding that or not.
Amy?
So some of the part, and I'm sorry that's not in there, about that our summary is, and I get that we're comparing them to all of those, but the library, based on its specific requirements, can only really be compared to, I think, 4 or 5, like certain, right? And then so what I did was based on our population is what our requirements are for hours for publications and those types of things. So that puts us in a bucket, I think, of all of ours, there's only about 4 or 5
Okay.
other communities, right? And then where do we fall in comparison to those that we have to be like, right?
Okay.
And so I think that we're kind of closer, with the outlier being Acton, just because they do things very differently there. But I'll add that in, and like Christy, we can chat back and forth.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe the library is not the best, example for this kind of a thing, but I just kind of wanted to get people's take on doing something like that, because I did something like that for other sections as well.
Christina, I do think that having the percentage and the dollar amount is important for exactly what you just said. Is that sometimes it might be 20% and it could be an actual really low amount, or it could be like you look at the school budget and it's going to be 2%.
Right.
So I think having both the percentage and the dollar amount is helpful for the reader.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other feelings on that? Okay. Great. Thank you. Kristen, do you want to just give a description of the changes in efficiencies?
Sure. So I just took the outline that I presented a few meetings ago, reordered that a little bit, and added narrative to everything. I think one of the things that I'm looking for guidance from this group on is under the town and school efficiencies, I talk about them specifically, but I don't talk about timing to implement or cost savings measures. When I believe when I did the shared services regionalization section, I was a little bit more clear on that. So the consistency is not there. I'd also just really appreciate for someone to read through this to make sure my sentences make sense and if it reads to the layman terms, because as Christina has said over and over, we've been in this so much that I feel like maybe it's in my head and I'm not getting it out properly in terms of how others might read this. So both for consistency purposes on what information needs to be put across related to any cost savings or implementation timelines. And then if I'm missing anything that kind of didn't leave my brain onto the piece of paper per se would be really helpful.
Okay, great. I think those will come out as we just keep running, looking over the document, Tom and I and Amy and Shana then. But I appreciate that. And let's see if we want to go down. So for school efficiencies, I don't know if you want to speak to this, Dr. Chu, or not, but Dr. Chu and I met yesterday, and you know, we were just trying to figure out how to account for the very real, you know, adjustments that have happened in the last couple of years, related to enrollment reductions and the other actual reductions that have happened based on tight budgets. And also a lot of the ones on the town side feel like they are related to the benchmarking and the data. And so the school data isn't producing that same, those same leads with the lean per pupil spending. So, you know, I think we have something to put in there. It just, did you want to add anything, Dr. Chu?
I was just going to say what we looked at was that the information that I had shared with this committee earlier when we had listed everything out in draft form. And so we're looking to say, how can we take that information and make it consistent within this report? But I think to your point, Valerie, you're right. Like when we looked at our benchmarking data, it didn't necessarily lead to additional questions for us to consider different areas, but we're still, you know, we still have our list of different things that we're looking at. We have the efficiencies, and then also just then the different consequences sections that we just want to make sure make sense to.
Yeah. So I think probably for both Kristen and Dr. Chu would be that next section about potential budget impacts, and do we start putting down in black and white some of those consequences that we've talked about. And one thing that sort of clicked for me as we were talking yesterday was an efficiency for me feels like what's an efficiency versus a consequence? And efficiency to me feels like something that you can still offer the same services, but you just found sort of a cheaper way to do it, right? And there's not a whole lot of those things in the schools because it's so personnel heavy, but we have plenty of consequences we can talk about if, you know, the funding doesn't happen. So I think this next section would really be that previous list that both of you have shared about consequences, and just we'll just have to be really sensitive about sort of the introduction to this section, I think, and like how to say none of these are etched in stone, or like these are not from the budget task force, but these would become owned by those boards, and the trade-offs would be thoroughly thought through, et cetera, et cetera. Does that capture? Okay, I'm seeing a head nod. Okay, good.
Yes.
Yeah, Tom.
Yeah, I was just going to agree. I think if we could just more or less just paste the stuff that we used in the handout for the retreat, then that'll make it easier for for either me or Amy or Valerie to write a little header to this. And it'll be brief because we're not a policymaking board. I mean, that's not what we're here for.
Right.
So it'll just be
Right.
Here's the inevitably these are the kinds of things that would have to happen if you were forced to make the kind of reduction we're talking about.
Yeah. Does anyone have any, just before we sort of leave this section, does anyone have any issue if we, on the schools section, that we do try to capture and speak to reductions that happened in previous years? Like, I don't want to surprise people by including that, but I do think that they are a very real part of the story that have gotten us to where we are now. Does anybody have thoughts?
I think
on
it's
that?
a good idea for both town and schools to do a little bit of, like, this idea of being efficient is not new to us. And so, Kristen, I think the town parts of that would be consolidation of the Department of Public Works. That was probably the biggest efficiency savings in recent times, but there may be others. Dan may certainly have others, but I don't know if Dan or Kristen would be willing to take a crack at a short half-page summary of some of the efficiency gains to date.
Okay. That feels right. Like, not to harp on it, but just to, acknowledge that these things you're right, being efficient is not new, and here are things that have happened. Okay.
Dan, can you just throw a note up in the efficiency section for us to talk about that, or wherever it's most appropriate?
Thanks. Okay, so then this next section, the potential budget impacts, would be the consequences, and then we end.
And then we rest. Yeah, I think if we
Um,
put the executive summary up front, then
Well,
that
I
will
guess,
just be the end.
yeah, okay, because I guess the unspoken part here is, are there formal recommendations that would take place? Are they embedded in the other places? Are we pulling them out? I sort of noticed in Hingham's report that they like highlight as they go along, here's a big recommendation embedded in its topic, and then they make a list at the end. Does anyone have thoughts on how we organize that, or is there like a next steps section? Like, what, I don't know, how do you just like, go ahead, Christina.
I always kind of like having like almost like a table somewhere, probably potentially in the beginning of, okay, these are all of our recommendations, and they're very brief, right? But then there's further description down below as to what each of those means. I feel like Hingham, I can't remember now, I don't remember whether it was, I saw that in Hingham, or maybe it was the 2004 or 2007 report that was done out of Westford. But I feel like gathering everything into one place is just kind of nice to look at a snapshot of, here are our recommendations, like, no bones about it, like, this is what we're recommending. And then for further information, you can find it, through that next section or however it works.
Yeah, I think that feels better to me than just leaving them sort of embedded and potentially lost within the rest of the report.
Okay, so the two things we'd want the reader to make sure they read would be the executive summary and then the table of summary recommendations, which will be both new revenue opportunities to explore and develop, and efficiency gains that we think are particularly fruitful.
Yeah, and hopefully maybe with all the work happening, we could get a draft of that table in front of this committee for the next Wednesday's meeting, right? To just have a set of everybody's eyes on it.
That makes sense. Valerie, do you want to assign someone to the table? Like, I could also take a crack at that too, because I sort of need to do that anyway for the executive summary.
Yeah, you or yes, okay,
Why don't I do those two?
okay. And then if I'm done with the benchmarking, I can take what you've done and make any edits. Okay, and then we have two appendices, well, three now, right? Because Tom, you talked about a third. For
Yeah, I'll just cut
fees,
and paste
town
that in.
fees. Okay. Appendix A, Amy, let me know as you sort of think about the community section at the top. If you want to, it's been a while since I laid eyes on sort of that document Erica shared and the document Vibhu shared. If those make sense to just be sort of cut and paste in the appendix or not. Let me know as you're putting your thoughts together for that. And then the Monte Carlo tool one is done, and you'll add fees. I think that was it. I added acknowledgements just so we wouldn't forget, but maybe they belong more up front. I don't know. Again, the Higham report did, and I know we've gotten a lot of staff support on time as we've been doing this. So if anybody has strong feelings about that, we could.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I don't know, Kristen or Dan, if you'd be willing to take a pass at the acknowledgements.
Yeah, and I think we should put it up front. I think, by the time people get through to 70 pages, they might be tired of it. So we want to make sure that we give people due credit up front.
Great. Maybe right even with the members, right underneath our list of members and the charge. We could have like a paragraph there about the unofficial members who have been helping. Okay.
Okay, so this is sounding good. So it sounds like what we'll do is push hard on content for the next week. Relatively soon, we'll try to do another comb through and just see if there's any data assignments we may have missed today that we want to make sure people focus on. We have a couple of pieces assigned. It sounds like the reader will experience, welcome, here's the charge, here's the team, here's the acknowledgements, here's the executive summary, here's our key recommendation list. So if they only get that far, they will have gotten a lot, because a lot of people are only going to get that far. And then after that, we'll have a good week basically to do a detailed edit just to make sure the typing is consistent and the wording is consistent, and we'll cross that bridge really starting next week. Any other things we need to make sure we check in on as we just really roadmap this all the way out to the presentation? After that, we'll probably be called on in meetings to explain what this is. Christina?
The only other thing I was thinking of, and I don't know where this goes, but when we were at the League of Women Voters social, we were asked, how our income compares to, not our per capita income, but I think it was more like our total budget dollars, how that compares to other towns. And there were a few other questions like that. And I wasn't sure if that was embedded in the data that Dan was coming up with, or if that should be more in like the benchmarking section. We do have that information out of one of the spreadsheet has, some of that information in it. But I didn't know how we felt about that or what exactly should be included.
Dan, I know I've seen a spreadsheet like that has all the benchmark towns and their population and their total budget. And
I think the question, is more like how much are we as reliant on property taxes as the next community, or is somebody getting more state aid? So it could just be one of those community comparison sheets dumped into sort of a stacked bar chart showing like maybe the town side data or something, with property tax as one color, state aid is another color. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay.
And Dan, just off the top, the only difference you'd expect to see would be percentage of commercial as a percent of the tax base, right? We're exceptionally low. A town like Acton's got more. That's really the only difference, I think. Does that sound true to you? That
Some of the local revenue was a little different. Acton actually has less commercial than we do.
Okay.
But yeah, those are probably two big. I think that we were also asked how much, how much does state aid make up our budget, compared to others. So yeah, something like that, just to kind of orient people. Maybe even another chart with I'll look through my notes because somebody had a good just a good few charts on comparing themselves to other towns, and it sort of puts you in this frame of mind of, oh, we have more or less, commercial. My tax bill, even though I'm complaining about how high it is not as high as this other person's, or it just kind of was a nice little comparison. So I'll look and I can send that out.
If you could send that to Dan.
Yeah.
Poor Dan. If you could send that to Dan, then maybe you can help us put that together. Valerie?
Tom, I had one more thought, and I know we're running up against 2:00, so we might not have to solve this here, but or this meeting, but I guess I'm trying to think of, like, with sort of my school committee hat on versus a budget task force hat, is what's our goal for October 18th? And is there a value in almost scheduling like a second tri-board meeting in addition to that, right? Like, I know we're really working hard to get the draft report in everyone's hands ahead of time so that hopefully everybody shows up and it's less like, but we could get a ton of resident questions that night. And so as the boards to sort of deliberate and help define the path forward, are we coming out of that night with like all the questions answered? Or like,
Well,
I guess
I
I'm
can
just
tell you
trying
what
to think
this.
after that.
Yeah, I can tell you what I think is going to happen with the select board, because we've mapped this out a little bit. So in the meeting after that meeting, we need to give guidance to the town staff about what they should prepare in terms of a budget. And I think we're going to ask them to prepare two budgets. Basically, one is a budget that, exists within the existing Prop 2.5 ceiling, sort of the expected normal revenue. And then the other is a budget that would maintain level service. And so that's the main first thing that I think we felt like we had to give the town, because the big assignment to ask them to create two versions of the budget. It's a huge amount of work. So we want to get that to them as early as possible. And I think as the select board explores, basically how much can we rely on these other revenue sources and efficiency? How much, do we think that we have to put forward an override in this case? That'll be sort of the guiding, those two budgets and what happens to them will sort of be our guideposts. So it may be that the school committee also wishes to give the school department the assignment of two budgets, basically. And we may have to have a little joint chairs meeting to talk about exactly what those numbers are and get quantified, just so we're doing the same assignment, basically. But I think that's probably that's at least what the select board's doing next. There could be, other, things that come up that require, follow on to all three boards together. But I don't know if that addresses sort of what you're thinking. So as we sort of road march towards the budget, making sure we give clear guidance, we want to understanding how that difference is emerging, and then charting a path, one versus the other, and relatively soon giving guidance about whether we'll ask the select board relatively soon to give guidance about whether sort of plan A is to pursue an override on this time frame. Because as soon as that becomes not a certain thing, but our plan A, then that triggers a whole bunch of other activity.
Yeah. Okay. That's helpful. Thank you. And yeah, thank you.
So Kristen, why don't we see if we can get a joint chairs meeting sometime after the 18th in that 2-week period, so we can sync up and make sure we're doing something cohesive.
I actually think maybe even a quick one before the 18th might just help make sure we're all on the same path.
Okay. Yeah, that's good for me. Kristen, you want to see if we can look for a time? Usually the joint chairs are like an hour-long Zoom.
Yeah,
like
I mean, we have three of you on here, and then it will just be the other three and myself. So, and Dr. Chu. Yes, we can arrange that before and after.
Thank you.
Okay. And Kristen, I mean, I think that we've talked about this before, but as I outlined it, does that sound like what the town staff needs?
Yeah, we definitely need to have that, the timing is a little off. The select board will meet October 24th, so that's less than a week from the budget task force meeting, so we might be pushed to November 14th, which is a little bit late.
Well, I think that I've already prepped we should do this in this meeting, but I think the select board sort of expects to at least give the guidance about what should happen for budget preparation, and that seems like the long lead item to me.
Yep, so the 24th. Good.
Yeah, I think we'll be ready on the 24th to give that guidance.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, I actually
Oh,
have to
second.
be on something else at 2. Does any other thoughts? So we'll do the same time next week. I think we've talked about what our focus will be. If anything occurs to you in between now and then, just shoot, I guess, Valerie and I an email, and we'll add it to the list of things.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, thanks everybody. All in favor? Okay, take care everybody. Thank you.